A retired ranger pulled a saddlebag from a hollow oak, and when he opened it, he went pale. It happened on the last morning of his last contract, in a forest he had walked for 30 years. The morning fog sat thick in the ravine below Wickiup Ridge, like something poured there by a hand that did not care whether men could see through it. Norris Langford walked the timberline, carrying a clipboard, a diameter tape, and a can of orange spray paint. He was 64 years old, and this was his last contract. 40 acres of old-growth Douglas fir and Sitka spruce slated for harvest the following week, and his job was the same as it had been for 30 years. Decide which trees go and which trees stay. He reached the big oak at the top of the ridge around 9. The tree was not part of the harvest. Oaks have no commercial value in Clatsop County. But Norris had known this tree since the early 80s, and he figured it was old when the country itself was young. 300 years, at least. The trunk measured 7 feet across at breast height, and a long, vertical split on the north side opened into a hollow big enough to fit a man's arm to the shoulder. He had walked past this tree 100 times. But today, there was something inside the hollow that was not bark and not rot. A dark shape pushed back into the cavity. Norris set down his clipboard. He reached in. His fingers closed on leather. He pulled. Out came a saddlebag, old and cracked, the buckles green with oxidation. Heavy, heavier than it should have been. He set it on the moss and knelt. The first buckle fought him, but gave. Inside was a manila folder, water-stained but legible. He opened it and found photocopied VA disability claim forms, 7 of them. Each one bore a different veteran's name and signature. Beneath the folder lay a zippered bank pouch holding a stack of statements from First Federal Savings in Astoria. Every statement carried the same name, Dean Suttles. And at the very bottom, underneath everything, a single dog tag on a broken chain. Norris held it up to the gray light filtering through the canopy. The metal was tarnished black, but the stamped letters were sharp as the day they were pressed. He recognized the dog tag before he read the name. He knew the shape of it, the nick on the lower right corner where it had caught on wire during a night patrol outside Fubai. Poole, Raymond J., blood type O positive, Methodist, his best friend, dead since 1982. Norris sat down on the moss with the tag in his fist and did not move for a long time. A Steller's jay screamed somewhere in the canopy and then went quiet, as if even the bird knew to leave a man alone with what he had found. The moss under him was damp and cold, and he could feel the wet soaking through his jeans, but he did not stand. The fog moved through the trees like something breathing, in and out, thinning and thickening, and the forest smelled of cedar and rot, and the peculiar sweetness of old wood giving itself back to the earth. He had carried Ray Poole's memory for 40 years the way a man carries a scar, always present, sometimes forgotten, never gone. And now, here was the proof that the wound had been inflicted on purpose by a hand he trusted. He remembered the last time he had seen Ray Poole alive. It was a Sunday afternoon in October of '82. Ray had driven his Ford pickup to Norris's place and sat on the tailgate drinking coffee from a thermos. He looked thin. His hands shook when he poured. They talked about the Seahawks game and the rain that would not stop, and a John Deere tractor that Norris was thinking about buying second-hand from a farm auction in Tillamook. Normal things, safe things. Ray had a way of steering talk toward the ordinary when the weight inside him got too heavy. Like a man piling sandbags against a flood he knew was coming anyway. "You ever hear back from the VA?" Norris had asked. Ray shook his head. "Dean says it's still working through the system. Says to be patient." "You been patient a long time, Ray." "I guess I have." He looked out at the trees, the fog,
the gray sky that never seemed to lift in Clatsop County between October and May. Funny how life works. You go over there and do what they ask and come home, and then you wait. Just wait and wait. That was the last conversation they ever had. Just two men on a tailgate talking about nothing because nothing was easier than everything. 3 days later, Ray drove his truck to the end of a logging road near Saddle Mountain and did not come back. His daughter Connie was 20 years old. She had to make the arrangements herself because her mother had passed the year before. The funeral was small. Dean Suttles gave the eulogy. He stood at the front of the chapel and called Ray a hero and a brother and said the world was poor for his passing. Norris sat in the third row and wept. He did not know then what he knew now. Norris opened his hand and looked at the tag again. Dean Suttles. The name on every bank statement in that pouch. Dean, who had served with them in Vietnam. Dean, who had volunteered to handle the VA paperwork for the men in their company who could not face the bureaucracy. Dean, who was the godfather of Norris's only daughter. Dean, who had sat at Norris's table last Thanksgiving and carved the turkey and told stories about the good old days, while the tag of the man he had robbed and killed as surely as if he had pulled a trigger, sat inside a hollow oak on Wickiup Ridge, waiting in the dark for 30 years. The fog shifted. The trees stood silent. Norris put the tag in his jacket pocket and closed the saddlebag and picked it up.
He did not finish marking the timber that day. He walked back down the ridge to his Chevy Silverado parked at the gate, set the bag on the passenger seat, and sat behind the wheel with his hands at 10 and 2, staring at nothing. He thought about calling the sheriff. He thought about calling Dean. He thought about driving the bag to the river and throwing it off the bridge at Astoria and letting the Columbia carry it all to the Pacific, where it would sink and rot and never ask him to choose between the living and the dead. He started the truck. The engine turned over rough, cold, damp, reluctant, and then it caught and held. He pulled onto the timber road and drove slow through the fog, the saddlebag riding beside him like a passenger with something to say. The timber road was unpaved, and the mud grabbed at the tires, and the trees closed overhead like a tunnel. And somewhere behind him, the big oak stood in the mist with its hollow empty for the first time in decades, holding nothing now but dark air and the memory of what had been hidden there. Norris did not go home. He drove past his turnoff without touching the brake and continued north on the county road until he reached the overlook above Young's Bay. It was a wide gravel pullout where loggers used to park during shift changes, empty now at mid-morning. Below, the bay lay flat and gray under the overcast, the water moving slow toward the river. He killed the engine and sat. The saddlebag was on the passenger seat. He pulled it onto his lap like a man handling something that might bite and opened it again. He went through every document, slow, one number at a time, one name at a time, because numbers do not lie unless someone makes them.
The 7 VA disability claims were dated between 1975 and 1979. Each one requested compensation for service-connected injuries, hearing loss, shrapnel wounds, chronic back pain, combat stress. Standard claims, the kind every man in their platoon had a right to file. The signatures were close. Whoever had done them knew the men's handwriting, but they were wrong. Norris had served with most of these men. He knew their writing from letters sent between fire bases and country, from Christmas cards signed at reunions, from the backs of photographs passed around at the VFW hall. Tommy Fisk always wrote his name with a little flourish under the K. Merle Danforth printed everything in block capitals because his cursive was so bad the Army clerks could not read it. And Ray Poole, who was left-handed, always crossed his T's with a downward stroke. A habit from writing in the rain, hunched over his knee in a foxhole, the pen dragging down because gravity and water pulled it that way. The forger crossed Ray's T's flat, level and neat. The hand of someone writing at a desk in a dry room. Norris set Ray's claim aside and picked up the bank statements. They spanned from 1976 through 1984. Monthly deposits in amounts that matched what the VA would have paid for the claimed disabilities. Every deposit went into Dean Suttles' personal account at First Federal Savings in Astoria. Norris pulled a pencil from his clipboard and did the math on the back of a cruise sheet. Over 8 years, the deposits totaled roughly $240,000. $240,000 stolen from men who had earned it in blood and nerve damage and nights they could not sleep through without screaming. He set the pencil down. His hand was steady. His jaw was not. He thought about what $240,000 meant in the late 70s and early 80s. It meant houses paid off. It meant medical bills covered. It meant a man could see a doctor for the shaking in his hands or the ringing in his ears, without choosing between treatment and groceries. It meant 7 men and their families might have had a different life. A life with the floor under them instead of falling through it. He picked up Ray's claim again and read it all the way through. Disability compensation for combat-related psychological trauma. The form described symptoms Ray had never put into words himself, but that everyone who knew him could see. Hypervigilance, insomnia, inability to maintain employment, emotional withdrawal. Someone had written these descriptions with clinical accuracy. Someone who knew Ray well enough to catalog his suffering and then use it to steal from him. Ray Poole came home from Vietnam unable to sleep.
Unable to work a full week at any job. Unable to hold his daughter Connie without his hands shaking so bad she thought he was cold. He applied for help through the proper channels, filling out the forms and trusting the system. And Dean Suttles, his friend, his brother in arms, told him he would handle the paperwork. Just hand it over, Ray. I know a clerk at the regional office. I will make sure it goes through. And it went through. The money came. Every month a check deposited into an account Ray Poole never knew existed. For 7 years, Ray waited. He told himself to be patient, repeating Dean's own words back to himself. He watched other men in their company buy new trucks, fix up their houses, pay medical bills. He did not know those men were waiting too, that they were not receiving their benefits either, that the only man getting paid was the one telling all of them to hold on.
In 1982, Ray drove his Ford to the end of a logging road and sat in the cab with the engine running until the gas ran out. When the search party found him 3 days later, the tank was dry and Ray was gone. His daughter Connie was 20. She spent the next 40 years believing her father was too proud to accept help, too stubborn to push the VA for what he was owed. That was the story the family told. That was the story Dean Suttles let stand. Norris stared at the dog tag lying in his palm. Dean had kept it. That was the thing he could not get past. Not the theft, not the forged signatures, not even Ray's death, though that sat in his chest like a stone too big to swallow. It was the tag. Dean had kept Ray's dog tag in the bag with the evidence, tucked underneath the paperwork like a pressed flower in a book, like a bookmark in the ledger of his crime, a souvenir, a trophy. Or maybe, Norris thought, a confession that Dean could never bring himself to speak out loud.
He closed the saddlebag and set it back on the seat. The wind picked up across the bay, chopping the water into small gray waves. A fishing boat was heading out toward the bar, its running lights still on, though the sun was somewhere above the clouds. Norris watched it go. There was a time when he would have envied those fishermen their simple purpose. Go out, drop nets, bring back what the sea gives you. But nothing felt simple now. He remembered a night in '71, their second month in country, when Ray and Dean and Norris were crouched behind a sandbag wall at Firebase Ripcord during a mortar attack. The rounds were coming in close enough to feel the concussion in their teeth, and between blasts, Ray had turned to Dean and said, completely serious, "If I die here, make sure Kathy gets my baseball card collection. The '67 mantle is worth something." Dean had laughed so hard he forgot to be afraid, and Norris had laughed too. And for a moment, the war was not the war, but just 3 boys from Oregon who were a long way from home and not yet broken. Dean took care of that trust the way he took care of everything Ray gave him. He spent it. Norris thought about what a man owes the dead. He thought about what he owed the living. He thought about Connie Poole shelving books at the county library in Warrenton, carrying her father's death like a weight she could never set down because nobody told her the truth about why it happened. He started the Chevy and pulled back onto the road. The Saddlebag sat on the passenger seat, heavy and still, and Norris drove south toward home with the question turning in his head like a wheel that would not stop. What do you do when the rot is in the heartwood and the tree is still standing? Norris spent 2 days not doing a thing about it. He did not tell his wife, Marlene. He did not call anyone.
He sat on the back porch in the early mornings with a cup of black coffee and the dog tag in his pocket and looked at the Coast Range while the fog burned off, or did not burn off, depending on the day's mood. The mountains out there were old and patient and did not care what men did to each other. He envied them for it. Marlene noticed. She always noticed. 38 years of marriage will do that to a woman. Sharpen her the way water sharpens stone. She stood in the doorway on the second morning and watched him sitting there, turning something over in his fingers. "You going to tell me what's bothering you, or do I have to guess?" "Nothing's bothering me." "You've been sitting on this porch since 5 in the morning 2 days running, Norris. You haven't touched the timber report. You haven't called the mill. You're holding that thing in your hand like it's a rosary, and you never were a Catholic." He put the tag back in his pocket. "I found something up on the ridge."
"I'm thinking on it." "Thinking on what?" "On what to do about it." She looked at him with that flat, patient expression she kept for the times he went quiet. The same expression she had worn for 38 years. She nodded once and went back inside. He heard her start the dishes. The water ran, the plates clinked, normal sounds. He wanted to hold on to them. On the 3rd morning, he made his decision. He drove to the VA regional office in Portland. 2 hours through rain on Highway 26, the wipers slapping time against the windshield. The Chevy held the wet road steady and slow, and Norris kept both hands on the wheel and did not turn on the radio. At the front desk, a young intake officer listened to his story with a blank expression. She was maybe 25. She wore her hair pulled back tight and had a pen behind her ear, like a carpenter. Norris explained that he had documents suggesting a veteran named Dean Suttles had forged disability claims for 7 men in the mid to late 70s. He spoke carefully, measured. Facts first, opinions later, nothing wasted. The officer asked for the documents. Norris hesitated. He had brought photocopies, keeping the originals locked in the gun safe bolted to the floor of his bedroom closet. The safe held a deer rifle, a shotgun, and now the evidence of a 40-year fraud. He handed over the copies. She leafed through them, assigned a case number, wrote it on a yellow sticky note, and handed it to him. She capped her pen. "These matters can take time. The records from that era may not be fully digitized. An investigator will be in touch." "How much time?" "I can't say, sir. Weeks, maybe longer." Norris folded the sticky note and put it in his wallet next to a photograph of Marlene and the kids from 1991. "Some of these men are dead. One of them died because he never got the help these claims were supposed to provide." The officer looked at him, and for the first time her blank expression cracked. Something moved behind her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll flag it as urgent." He nodded and left. The drive back through Portland took him past the VA Medical Center on the hill, a sprawl of brick buildings where men who had been promised care waited in hallways and filled out forms, and hoped that someone on the other side of the desk gave a damn. Norris had been there twice himself, once for a shoulder that never healed right after a fall in the bush, and once for the hearing in his left ear that had been going since a mortar round landed close enough to ring his bell for 6 months straight. Both times the system worked for him. Both times it was slow and clumsy, but it worked. He had always assumed it worked for everyone. On the drive home through rain, his hands tightened on the steering wheel. Time. The officer said time.
Ray Poole did not have time. Ray ran out of time on a logging road near Saddle Mountain with the engine running and no one coming. Near Vernonia, he pulled off at a rest stop and used the payphone bolted to the outside wall of the restroom building. He called the VFW post in Astoria. The post commander, Virgil Hess, answered on the third ring. Virgil was 71, a Korean War vet who had run the post for 15 years with the easy authority of a man who had nothing left to prove. Virgil, it's Norris. When's the next company reunion? 3 weeks. Second Saturday of the month, same as always. Dean's already put his name down. You coming this year? Yeah, I'm coming this year. Well, good. Been a while since we saw you. Dean'll be glad. He was just asking about you last week. Norris bet he was. I'll be there. He hung up. He remembered a Saturday in the summer of '74, 2 years after they all came home. The company had a picnic at Ecola State Park, out on the headland above the Pacific. Somebody brought a grill, and somebody brought horseshoes, and somebody brought enough beer to float a patrol boat. Ray was there. Dean was there. Norris was there with Marlene, who was still his girlfriend then, and already smarter than any of them. Ray's girl Kathy was pregnant with Connie, round as a pumpkin and laughing at everything. Dean cooked hamburgers and told lies about a fish he caught, and they all sat on the grass watching the sun go down over the ocean, like men who had earned the right to sit and watch. That was before the paperwork, before the forgeries, before Ray started waiting for checks that would never come, before the logging road and the empty tank, and the daughter who spent her life blaming the wrong cause. That evening, Dean Suttles pulled into Norris's driveway in his GMC Sierra. He stepped out carrying a 6-pack of beer.
He was thick-bodied, white-haired, his face creased from decades of coastal weather. He wore a Vietnam veteran's cap and a flannel shirt. He looked exactly like what Norris had always believed him to be, a decent man, a good neighbor, a brother. Dean settled into the porch chair and cracked open a beer. Heard you were up on Wickiup Ridge last week. Find anything worth cutting? Norris felt the tag in his jacket pocket. Just timber. They drank beer and watched the fog roll in. Dean told a story about their old sergeant, a man named Kovacs, who once got a jeep stuck in a rice paddy and blamed it on the Vietnamese road system, which did not exist. Norris laughed. The sound came out of him like something borrowed, and he gave it back as soon as he could. When Dean left, Norris stood on the porch and watched the taillights of the Sierra disappear down the gravel road into the fog. 40 years of friendship. 40 years of lies living inside it like rot inside a standing tree, invisible from the outside, silent, patient, eating the heartwood one ring at a time until there was nothing left but bark and air. A week before the reunion, Norris drove to Warrenton to see Connie Poole. He had not seen Ray's daughter in years. The last time was at a Memorial Day ceremony at the County Veterans Monument, where she had laid flowers at the base of the stone and stood apart from the crowd with her hands folded in front of her, like a woman holding herself together by the pressure of her own grip. She had not spoken to anyone. She had not stayed for the reception. She came, she placed the flowers, and she left, and Norris had watched her go and felt the old sadness move through him like weather. He found her at the county library where she worked. It was a small building with high windows and the smell of old paper and floor wax.
She was in the back stacks, shelving returns from a wheeled cart, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this work for so long, the books almost shelved themselves. She was 60 now, thin.
She had her father's sharp jaw and steady eyes, and when she turned and saw Nora standing at the end of the row, she recognized him immediately. "Mr. Langford, it's been a long time." "It has, Connie. You look well." "I look old, but thank you." A small smile, quick, like a bird landing and leaving. "Are you here for a book?" "I'm here to talk about your father, if you're willing." The smile went away. She set the book she was holding back on the cart and looked at him for a long moment. Then she led him to the break room, a narrow space with a microwave and a coffee maker and a window that looked out on the library's small parking lot. She poured 2 cups of coffee into foam cups, and they sat at a table covered with a plastic cloth that had faded flowers on it. Connie set her cup down. "What about Dad? Tell me what you remember about the VA paperwork, the disability claim he filed." Connie wrapped both hands around her cup. "He came home and he was never the same. You know that. Everybody knows that. He couldn't sleep. He'd go days without talking. Mom said he used to wake up in the middle of the night and stand at the window for hours, just staring out at the dark like he was waiting for something that was never going to come." She paused. "He applied for VA disability. I don't remember exactly when. I was little. But I remember Dean coming over to the house and sitting at the kitchen table with Dad, going through papers. Dean said he would handle it. He knew somebody at the regional office. He promised he could cut through the red tape. And then? And then nothing happened. No checks, no letters. Dad said the government forgot about them." He used that word, forgot, like it was just a clerical thing, like somebody lost a file in a drawer and it would turn up eventually. She looked down at her coffee. He stopped asking after a while. Mom said he was too proud, too stubborn. She repeated that a lot after he died, that he just wouldn't push for what he was owed. And I believed her. I was 20. What did I know? She was quiet for a moment. Norris could hear the hum of the fluorescent light above them and the soft sound of someone typing at the circulation desk in the next room. Connie turned her cup slowly on the table. "Sometimes I wonder if it was something else. Not pride. Something worse. Like he just gave up. Like he decided it wasn't going to get better and the help wasn't coming and there was no point in waiting anymore." Norris listened and said nothing about the saddlebag. Not yet. The words were right there at the edge of his teeth, pressing outward, wanting to be said. Your father did not give up. Your father was betrayed. The help was coming, every month, and a man he trusted took it and let him die. But the timing was wrong. Connie deserved the full truth, and the full truth deserved a reckoning that had witnesses. He thanked her for the coffee and stood. She walked him to the library door. The afternoon light came through the tall windows and lit the dust motes floating in the air between the shelves. And for a moment, the library looked like a church, quiet and full of patience. Connie stopped him at the door. "Mr. Langford, why now? After all these years, why are you asking about Dad now?" He looked at her. Ray's eyes looking back at him from a face 40 years older than the one in his memory. He held her gaze. "Because something came to light. And when it did, I couldn't look away." She studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, the way her father used to nod when he understood something he did not want to understand. "Well then." She folded her arms.
"I hope whatever it is, it was worth the wait." He drove home through rain so heavy his wipers could not keep up. The Chevy crawled along Highway 101 with its headlights cutting about 20 feet into the downpour and no farther. He thought about Connie sitting alone in her house in Warrenton tonight, the daughter of a man who trusted the wrong friend, carrying a grief built on a lie. He remembered Ray teaching Connie to ride a bicycle in the driveway of their old house on 12th Street. It was the summer of '78, and Connie was about 4 years old, all knees and elbows and fierce determination. Ray held the back of the seat and jogged alongside her, his hand steady even when the rest of him was not. "Don't look down," he told her. "You look down, you'll fall. Look where you want to go." And she did. She looked up and pedaled hard, and Ray let go, and she rode all the way to the end of the driveway and fell into the grass, laughing. Ray stood there watching her with something on his face that Norris had not seen since before the war. Joy. Plain and simple and almost too bright to look at. That evening, Norris called the VA investigator assigned to his case. The woman's name was Special Agent Torres. She had a voice like someone reading from a textbook that she no longer believed in. Mr. Langford, the investigation is proceeding, but I have to be straightforward with you. The statute of limitations on federal benefits fraud is 5 years. The claims you brought us are more than 40 years old. Criminal prosecution is extremely unlikely. What does that mean in plain English? It means we can refer the matter to the Inspector General for administrative review. It means the VA can pursue civil recovery of the funds. But you should prepare yourself for the possibility that no criminal charges will be filed against Mr. Suttles. Norris stood in his kitchen with the phone in his hand and the dark pressing against the windows. The law would not touch Dean Suttles. The system that failed Ray Poole in life would fail him again in whatever passed for justice. Thank you. He set the phone back in its cradle. He sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. The reunion was 6 days away. Every man Dean had robbed, or their families, would be in that room. The law could not reach Dean, but the truth could. And the truth did not have a statute of limitations. 4 days before the reunion, Dean came back. But this time he was not carrying beer, and he was not smiling. Norris was in the garage sharpening a chainsaw chain on the bench grinder when the GMC pulled into the driveway. He heard the door slam and the footsteps on the gravel, and he knew from the rhythm of the walk that something had changed.
A man who has spent 30 years reading trees can read people too. And Dean's step was faster than usual and shorter, the gait of a man who is moving toward something he does not want to face, but cannot avoid. Dean appeared in the garage doorway. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and there was a look on his face Norris had never seen before. Cautious, measuring, like a man studying a river crossing and calculating whether the current will take him. Dean pulled his hands from his pockets. I need to talk to you about something. He stepped inside without being invited. Norris turned off the grinder and set the chain on the bench. The garage smelled of bar oil and sawdust, and the cold that crept in from the concrete floor. Dean did not sit. He stood near the workbench with his shoulders drawn up tight. Dean glanced toward the road. Not here. Inside. They went inside.
In Norris's living room, surrounded by mounted elk antlers and framed photographs of their platoon, Dean lowered himself onto the edge of the couch and sat with his forearms on his knees. He looked smaller than he usually did, like a man who had started to fold inward. I heard you went to the VA office in Portland last week. Dean's jaw worked. Somebody at the post mentioned it. Who told you that? Doesn't matter who told me. Is it true? Norris sat in the armchair across from him. Between them, on the mantel, stood the platoon photograph. 1969. 23 boys in fatigues lined up in front of a Huey helicopter at Camp Eagle. Ray Poole was in the back row, grinning, his arm around Dean's shoulder. They were all so young in that picture it hurt to look at it. Norris met his eyes. It's true. Dean nodded slowly, like a man hearing a diagnosis he had suspected. You and I go back a long way, Norris. 45 years. I was at your wedding. I held your daughter the day she was born. I watched her take her first steps in your living room, right here. He gestured at the floor. I'm asking you, as a friend, as a brother, whatever you found on that ridge, let it stay on that ridge. The words hung between them like smoke from a fire. Neither one of them had started. Norris shook his head. I can't do that. You can. You just don't want to. There's a difference. Not this time there isn't. Dean leaned back. His face was gray, the color of river stone. Those claims were filed a long time ago, Norris. The money's gone. The men are gone. Most of them, anyway. What good does it do now to dig all this up? Norris thought about how to answer that. He thought about diplomacy and tact, and the careful words a smart man uses when he wants to keep a bridge from burning. Then he thought about Ray Poole, sitting in a truck on a logging road with the engine running and nobody coming, and the diplomacy went out of him like air from a cut tire. Norris kept his voice low. You kept his tag. Dean went still, his whole body locked. Even his breathing seemed to stop. You kept Ray's dog tag in the bag with the paperwork. Why? The silence stretched. Outside, a truck passed on the county road, and its engine noise faded, and left nothing but the wind in the fir trees. Dean's hands gripped each other between his knees. Dean's voice came out thin, barely there. Because I owed him that much. I owed him something. You owed him his money, Dean. You owed him his benefits. You owed him his life. Dean stood up. His chair creaked as his weight left it. He took 2 steps toward the door and stopped. His back was to Norris, and for a moment he looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding. If you do this, you'll lose everything.
Every friend you have in this county wears that same cap I'm wearing. They're not going to thank you for this. They'll hate you for making them look at it. Norris reached into the drawer of the side table where Marlene kept the TV remote and a deck of cards and a pair of reading glasses. His hand found the dog tag. He pulled it out and held it up. Turn around, Dean. Dean turned. He saw the tag. His face did something Norris had never seen it do in 45 years. It broke. Not dramatically, not like a man collapsing. Just a small fracture that traveled from his eyes to his mouth, the way a crack travels through ice when the weight on it shifts. Norris held the tag steady. I'm not doing it for them. Dean left without closing the door. The fog poured in, heavy and cold, smelling of salt and the river. Norris heard the Sierra start and the tires crunch on the gravel, and then nothing. He sat in the chair with the tag in his hand and the open door and the cold air filling the room.
Marlene came down the stairs. She stood in the hallway and looked at the open door and then at Norris. Was that Dean's truck? Yes. What did he want? Norris turned the tag over in his fingers. He wanted me to forget something. And? And I can't. She walked to the door and closed it, and stood there with her back against it, her arms crossed, looking at him with those sharp, steady eyes that had never let him hide from anything, not even himself. Then don't. She turned and went back upstairs. That was Marlene. No speeches, no drama. Just the truth spoken plain, like hammering a nail straight. She had a gift for that, and Norris had loved her for it since the day they met at a dance in Astoria in '73, when she told him his haircut looked like something a lawnmower did, and he laughed so hard he forgot to be nervous. He sat in the quiet house with the knowledge that in 4 days he would stand in a room full of men he had known since he was 19 years old and tear apart the only world they had left. He remembered a night in Vietnam when their platoon was pinned down in a tree line near the Perfume River. The fire was coming from 3 directions, and there was nowhere to go, and Norris was pressed flat against the earth with his face in the mud and his rifle useless because he could not see what he was shooting at. Ray was beside him. Dean was 5 meters to the left. The tracers came in red and green, pretty as Christmas lights if you could forget what they meant. And in the middle of it, Ray reached over and put his hand on Norris's back. Did not say a word. Just put his hand there and kept it there while the world exploded around them. That weight, that steadiness, the knowledge that someone was beside you in the dark. Norris closed the door against the fog. He locked it.
He put the tag back in the drawer. 4 days, that was all. And then the silence would end, and the speaking would begin, and nothing would ever be the same. The VFW Hall in Astoria sits on a bluff above the Columbia River Bar, where the river meets the Pacific, and the water is never still. The wind comes off it sharp and salt-heavy, and it does not care about the men inside the building, or the things they carry, or the things they have done. It just blows. Inside, the hall was warm. American flags hung from the ceiling beams, limp in the still air. A banner stretched across the back wall read, "Welcome home, Charlie Company, second Saturday." 17 men and 8 family members sat at folding tables arranged in a square. Paper plates of potluck food, deviled eggs, baked beans, sliced ham, somebody's cornbread, a green bean casserole that nobody touched, but nobody threw away because Harlan Pratt's widow made it every time, and the men did not have the heart. Cans of coffee. A bottle of bourbon, making its slow, democratic way around the table. Dean Suttles sat at the head, where he always sat, the unofficial leader, the man who had organized these reunions for 30 years, who sent the cards, who made the calls, who remembered birthdays and anniversaries and the names of grandchildren he had never met. He was laughing at something Virgil Hess said when Norris walked in. Norris came through the door carrying the saddlebag. The leather was cracked and old, and it hung from his hand like something dug up from a grave. He did not take off his jacket. He did not nod hello. The room went quiet. Not because of the bag, because of Norris's face. There was something on it that these men recognized from a long time ago. The look a man gets when the perimeter has been breached and there is no falling back. Virgil Hess stood. "Norris, glad you could make it. Grab a plate." Norris did not grab a plate.
He walked to the center of the square of tables and set the saddlebag down on the plywood surface with a heavy sound. Everyone looked at it. The room was quiet enough to hear the wind against the windows and the flag lines tapping against the pole outside. "I found this on Wickiup Ridge." His voice was steady, not loud. The voice of a man who had practiced these words in his head for 3 weeks and was now saying them for the first and last time. Inside a hollow oak that's been standing since before any of us were born. The tree's marked for cutting next week. Another 7 days and this would have gone through a chipper, and nobody would have ever known. He opened the bag. He reached in and pulled out the manila folder and unfolded it on the table. He laid out the 7 claim forms, one by one, reading each name aloud. The names came out of his mouth like stones dropped into still water. Thomas Fisk, service-connected hearing loss. Tommy Fisk, 70, sitting 3 seats from Dean, leaned forward and stared at the paper bearing his name. Merle Danforth, shrapnel wounds, left leg. Merle, 69, his cane hooked over the back of his chair, set down his coffee. Harold Jessup, chronic lumbar injury. Carl Jessup's brother, dead since '95. Carl was in the room. His face went white. William Voss, combat-related stress disorder. Billy Voss died in 2003. His widow, Ruth, was sitting at the end of the table with a plate she had not touched. Harlan Pratt, bilateral hearing loss, tinnitus. Harlan was gone too. His son had come tonight in his place. Kenneth Briggs, Agent Orange exposure, peripheral neuropathy. Kenny Briggs, dead since '89, no family present. Norris read his name into the silence anyway, because someone had to. Raymond Poole, combat-related psychological trauma. Norris paused. He laid out the bank statements. He spread them across the table like a hand of cards that no one wanted to see. Every page, every monthly deposit, every number pointing to the same account at First Federal Savings in Astoria. Then he reached into the bag one final time and brought out the dog tag. He held it up so everyone could see the tarnished metal and the stamped letters. Then he set it down, gently, directly in front of Dean Suttles. Ray Poole's tag. Norris's voice did not waver. Found it at the bottom of a bag full of forged VA claims. Claims filed in your names. Benefits deposited into one account. He looked at Dean. Your account, Dean. $240,000. Over 8 years. From men who bled for the same flag hanging over your head right now. The room did not erupt. There was no shouting. These were men who had learned silence in jungles and rice paddies and the long watches of nights that lasted forever.
Men who knew the sound that comes before the explosion, which is no sound at all. The silence in that room was louder than any voice could have been. Dean stared at the dog tag. His hands lay flat on the table on either side of it, palms down, fingers spread. The bourbon bottle sat untouched beside his elbow. The overhead light made the tarnished metal gleam dull silver. Norris. Just the name, nothing else. No defense, no explanation, no denial. Just the name of the man who had ended his 40-year secret, spoken like a man saying the name of a place he could never go back to. Norris waited. The clock on the wall ticked. The wind pushed against the windows. The flag lines tapped. Someone's coffee cup trembled against its saucer with a faint ceramic chatter. Then Merle Danforth, 69, whose name was on the fourth claim form, reached over from his seat and picked up the document with his name on it. He read it, slowly, holding it close because his eyes were not what they were.
He looked at Dean. He set the paper down. He pushed his chair back, picked up his cane, and walked out the door without a word. One by one they followed. Carl Jessup stood, looked at Dean for a long moment, then turned his back and left. Tommy Fisk, Harlan Pratt's son, Billy Voss's widow Ruth, who paused at the door and looked back once and then did not look back again. Ray Poole's cousin from Seaside, a quiet man named Gerald who drove 40 minutes to attend these reunions and had never missed one in 20 years. They stood. They left. No one spoke. No one shouted. The door opened and closed, and each time the cold river wind blew through and stirred the paper plates and the napkins, and the 7 claim forms spread across the table. Within 5 minutes, Dean Suttles sat alone at a table set for 25. The potluck food was getting cold. The banner above him still read, "Welcome home." The bourbon bottle stood where it was, untouched. Dean's hands had not moved from the table. Norris was the last to leave. He picked up the dog tag from the table. Dean did not stop him, did not reach for it, did not say a word. At the door, Norris turned and looked back. Dean was sitting with his hands still flat on the table, staring at the place where the tag had been. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this moment for 40 years, and was not surprised that it had finally come. The look on his face was not anger or defiance or shame. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who has carried a lie for so long that the truth, when it arrives, feels not like punishment, but like permission to finally set it down. Norris stepped through the door, and the wind hit him, and the river was loud below the bluff, and the night was dark and cold and full of salt. Behind him, the door closed on an empty room. The aftermath moved through the veterans' community the way a slow current moves through deep water.
You cannot see it on the surface, but underneath, everything shifts. Within a week, every man in Charlie Company knew what Dean Suttles had done. The phone calls started the night of the reunion and did not stop. Norris knew because his phone rang too, though he let Marlene answer most of them. Some men wanted to talk, some wanted to yell. Some just wanted to hear the story again, needing to hold the pieces up to the light one more time to be sure they were seeing what they were seeing. Virgil Hess called on the second day. His voice was rough and flat. I sat next to that man for 30 years, Norris. 30 years of reunions. He poured my coffee. He sent me a card every Christmas. I don't know what to do with that. I don't either, Virgil. You did the right thing. I know. Does it feel like the right thing? Norris looked out the kitchen window at the fog in the trees. No, it does not. The VA Inspector General reopened the case based on the original documents Norris retrieved from his gun safe and delivered to Special Agent Torres in Portland. He drove down on a Tuesday and sat in a gray office under fluorescent lights while Torres photocopied every page. Torres squared the photocopied pages on the desk and looked at Norris with something that might have been respect. The administrative review will take months, but it will happen. Criminal prosecution remained unlikely due to the statute of limitations, but the VA initiated civil proceedings to recover the stolen benefits from Dean's assets. The Inspector General's office contacted the families of all 7 veterans. 3 were still living, 4 were dead, including Raymond Poole. For the living, the VA began processing legitimate claims with expedited review. For the dead, survivor benefits were recalculated and back payments authorized to next of kin.
The wheels of the government turned slowly, grudgingly, with many forms and long silences. But they turned. Norris spent the weeks after the reunion doing ordinary things. He finished the timber report for the Wickiup Ridge parcel. He drove it to the mill office and collected his last paycheck and shook hands with the foreman. And that was the end of 30 years of work. He came home and Marlene had made pot roast, which she only made when she thought he needed something solid in him. Marlene set the plate in front of him. "You're retired now." "I guess I am." "How does it feel?" "Like every other day, but with less to do." She sat down across from him and poured herself a glass of water, and looked at him with eyes that had seen him through war and work and children and loss, and never once looked away. "You did what Ray would have done for you, if it had been the other way around." That was the only time she spoke about it directly. It was enough. Connie Poole received a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs on a Thursday in late October. It arrived in a brown government envelope, with her name printed on a label that some clerk in Portland had stuck slightly crooked. She opened it in the library parking lot, sitting in her car with the engine off and the rain tapping on the roof. The letter informed her that her father's disability claim had been fraudulently intercepted between 1975 and 1982. Attached was notification of back benefits owed to the estate of Raymond J. Poole. The number was enough to change a life, or at least to change the shape of a grief that had sat in one position for too long. She called Norris from the parking lot. She was crying so hard she could barely speak. Her voice broke twice before the words came clear. "He wasn't too proud. He wasn't too proud, Mr. Langford. He just never got it. He never got the help." Norris closed his eyes. "No, he didn't. All those years I blamed him. All those years I thought he was too stubborn to take what they offered, and he never even knew it was there." "I know, Connie." She was quiet for a moment. The rain was audible through the phone, soft and steady. "Thank you," her breathing steadied, "for finding it, for not letting it stay in that tree. I wish I'd found it sooner." "You found it when it was ready to be found. That's how things work sometimes." He did not believe that, but he let Connie have her version. She had earned it. Dean Suttles did not fight the proceedings. He signed a consent order agreeing to liquidate his property. The 10-acre parcel outside Astoria was sold at auction on a cold Saturday in November. The GMC Sierra was sold too. Dean's savings were garnished. He moved into a single room at a boarding house in Seaside, a narrow room with a single window looking out on a parking lot. Norris drove past the place once,
not on purpose, and saw it from the road. He did not stop. The VFW post voted to revoke Dean's membership. The motion carried unanimously. No one spoke against it. No one spoke for him. His daughter Sarah called from Eugene on a Sunday evening. She was 35, a schoolteacher, married, with 2 boys Norris saw when he could, and not as often as he wanted. "Dad, why isn't Uncle Dean coming to Thanksgiving this year?" Mom said something happened, but she wouldn't tell me what. Norris closed his eyes. He had known this call was coming, and he had dreaded it more than the confrontation at the VFW hall. "He did something a long time ago, sweetheart. Something bad. He stole money from men we served with. From their VA benefits. One of those men was Ray Poole, and Ray died because of it." She was quiet for a long time. He could hear her boys in the background, arguing about something, their voices high and bright and untouched by anything that mattered. Sarah's voice went small. "He was my godfather. I know. He taught me to fish."
I know that too. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry too. That was all. She did not ask for details. She was Norris's daughter, which meant she knew when a thing had been spoken, and there was nothing else to add. The VA administrative law judge issued her ruling on a gray Wednesday in November. Dean Everett Suttles knowingly and fraudulently obtained disability benefits intended for 7 veterans. Total amount, $241,000. Full restitution ordered. The judge added one sentence that Norris read 3 times when the letter arrived. The men whose names appear on these claims earned their benefits in combat. The respondent earned nothing but their trust, and he spent that too. Connie Poole used her father's back benefits to establish the Raymond J. Poole Memorial Fund at the Clatsop County Veterans Service Office. The fund provided emergency assistance to veterans struggling with paperwork, transportation to appointments, help filing claims, someone to call when the system feels impossible. She volunteered there every Saturday with a cup of coffee and a stack of forms, and the patience of a woman who understood what it meant to wait for help that does not come. The first veteran she helped was a 26-year-old Marine who could not get his hearing loss claim processed. She drove him to Portland and sat with him for 4 hours while the paperwork went through. On the drive home, he asked her why she did this. She kept her eyes on the road. The rain was falling, the way it always does on Highway 26, and the wipers were doing their best. My father needed someone to sit with him. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Nobody did. The company reunions continued. The second Saturday of every month, the men gathered at the VFW hall above the river. The potluck still happened. The bourbon still made its way around the table. The stories still got told, though some of them had new edges now, and the laughter was sometimes quieter than it used to be. Dean's chair stayed empty. No one removed it. No one folded it up and put it in the closet with the other extras. No one sat in it. It stood at the head of the table where he had always sat, and it became its own kind of memorial, not to Dean, to the thing they lost, which was not a friend, but the belief that they had known him. Norris drove his Chevy Silverado to the Veterans Cemetery on the hill above Astoria on a Sunday morning in December. The grass was wet. The headstones stood in rows as straight as planted timber, white against the green, each one marking the place where a man had come to rest after the world was done with him. He found the marker without having to look. He had been here enough times that his feet knew the way. Poole, Raymond J., Private First Class, United States Army. 1947 to 1982. Norris knelt. His knees ached on the wet ground, but he did not hurry. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the dog tag. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the tarnish smooth under his thumb. Then he placed it on the granite. The chain coiled on the stone like a question mark that had finally found its answer. He stood. He did not speak. There was nothing left to say that the silence did not say better. The fog was moving in from the river, slow and gray.
wrapping around the headstones the way it wraps around the trees on Wickiup Ridge. The rows disappeared one by one into the gray, the names going with them, until there was nothing but white shapes in white air and the sound of the wind off the Columbia. Norris turned and walked back down the hill toward his truck. His boots left dark prints in the wet grass. Behind him, the tag rested on the stone. The fog closed around it. The morning was quiet. The dead kept their peace. Sources: 1. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Clatsop_county, _Oregon. 2. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Astoria, _Oregon. 3. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/United_States_Department_Veterans_Affairs. 4. https://www.va.gov/disability/how-2-file-claim/5. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/veterans_of_foreign_wars. 6. https://www.va.gov/oig/7. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/timber_cruising. 8. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Sitka_spruce. 9. https://www.oregon.gov/odf/pages/index.asp. X. 10. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Columbia_River_bar. 11. https://www.benefits.va.gov/benefits/12. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/Vietnam_war.